You just had a really good meeting. You were on it, connecting dots, moving the conversation forward. You remembered who you are at your best. It feels great. You say you'll follow up with a summary, reasonable thing to say, and you mean it. 11 days later, and you still haven't sent it. You think about the email probably 30 times. You open a draft, close it. You tell yourself you'll do it after lunch, after the next call, tomorrow morning when you're fresh. So you scroll. Watch a video you don't really want to watch. Clean something that doesn't need cleaning. Or read an article about productivity. You think about it again today, and you'll probably think about it tomorrow. And what's strange, what you can't explain to anyone, is that it's not even a hard email. 20 minutes, maybe less. But every time you get close, something gets in the way. A kind of low-level dread you can't quite name. So you wait. You tell yourself the weekend. You tell yourself Monday. You tell yourself when this week settles down. It doesn't settle down. First, something important. If you've spent years believing you're lazy or undisciplined, or just not trying hard enough, I want you to set that story down for a few minutes. Because that story isn't accurate, and it's been costing you. That feeling I just described, the paralysis, the avoidance, the inability to start things that actually matter to you, it affects millions of adults, smart adults, high-achieving adults, people with advanced degrees, demanding careers, and a genuine desire to do good work. It doesn't happen because they don't care. And it doesn't happen because they lack willpower. It happens because of something much more specific. Something going on in the brain that most people were never taught to understand. And once you understand it, a lot of things start to make sense. When smart people struggle to execute, there are a few explanations that tend to get offered. You just need to be more disciplined. Or set a schedule, stick to it, make a to-do list. Have you tried waking up earlier? Tried a productivity app? Tried a planner? Maybe you've tried all of those things. Maybe some of them worked for a while. Maybe none of them stuck. Here's why. Those solutions are built on an assumption that the problem is effort. That if you just tried harder, or wanted it more, or built better habits, everything would click. But what if effort isn't the variable? What if the real problem is that your brain isn't getting the signal it needs to start in the first place? Because that's what the research actually shows. Here's the mechanism. The brain has a system, a reward and motivation system, that runs largely on a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine isn't just about pleasure. It plays a central role in motivation, in the brain's willingness to engage and initiate. It's the system that says, this is worth moving toward. Start. For many people, that system activates reliably based on importance. Something matters to them, and often that's enough to get going. But in some brains, and this is the key, that system doesn't respond reliably to importance alone. It responds to something else. Interest, urgency, novelty, challenge, stakes. So here's what that means in practice. A project that's genuinely important, meaningful, something that matters at work, something you care about, might produce almost no activation signal. Not because you don't care, but because important isn't the right fuel for your brain. But the same brain, given a tight deadline, suddenly it's working. Give it a problem that's genuinely interesting, it's locked in. Put it under real pressure, it performs. This is why you can hyper-focus on something you're obsessed with for 6 hours straight, and then sit paralyzed in front of a task you know matters for 40 minutes. It's not inconsistency of character. It's a brain that runs on a different fuel. There's another layer to this. Even when the activation signal is there, even when you genuinely want to work, there's a set of mental skills required to actually do it. These are called executive functions. Things like getting started on a task, holding a plan in your mind while you work through it, shifting between steps, managing time, regulating the frustration when something isn't going smoothly. These functions are housed mostly in the prefrontal cortex, the front of the brain, and they are the engine of professional performance. Here's the thing. In some brains, those functions are less consistently available. Not absent, but inconsistent. They work brilliantly sometimes, and then become much harder to access or sustain at other times, which creates a pattern that looks very confusing from the outside, and honestly, from the inside too. You can absolutely nail a high-pressure presentation and then completely forget to send a follow-up email the same afternoon. You can write a brilliant, complex proposal and then be unable to make yourself answer a simple message for 3 days. It looks like inconsistency, and it feels like inconsistency, but it's actually something more specific. What I've been describing, the activation problem, the inconsistent executive function, the brain that runs on interest and urgency instead of importance, that's the neurological profile of ADHD. Not the version you probably learned about in school. Not the fidgety kid who can't sit still. The adult version. The professional version. The version that often goes unrecognized for decades, precisely because the people who have it are smart enough to compensate, to mask, to get by, until the demands get high enough that compensating stops working. If you're watching this and you don't have a diagnosis, that's okay. A lot of people don't. And this video isn't here to tell you that you definitely have ADHD. It's worth saying clearly, ADHD is one of the most common explanations for this pattern, but it's not the only one. Stress, anxiety, and burnout can look similar, which is why proper assessment matters. What I will say is this: if this description of your brain resonates, if you've been quietly wondering why you work the way you work, that question is worth taking seriously. Because there's a real answer, and the answer changes things. I want to leave you with something. Knowing what you need to do and not being able to make yourself do it is one of the most isolating feelings in professional life. Because it doesn't make sense on the surface. And because we live in a culture that treats productivity as a moral virtue, the inability to produce can feel like a character flaw. It isn't. What you're dealing with is a brain difference, a real, documented neurological difference in how the motivation and executive systems work. And here's what that means, and this is probably the most important thing in this video. Willpower alone won't reliably solve this. Not because you're weak, but because you're trying to solve a fuel problem with more effort. Think about that for a second. If your car runs on diesel and you keep filling it with gasoline, it's not going to run better because you try harder. The effort isn't the variable. The fuel is. The real solutions look different. They work with the brain instead of against it, using interest, structure, urgency, and external systems in ways that actually match how your brain activates. That's what we're going to get into. If this video gave you language for something you've been living, drop a comment below. Tell me if this resonated. Tell me what you're struggling with. It genuinely shapes what comes next. I also put together a free one-page guide on the activation triggers that actually work for this kind of brain. Links in the description if you want it. And if you want to keep going, subscribe. There's a lot more coming. You don't have to figure this out alone. I'll see you in the next one.